Welcome to this week's podcast with UAC. It's been a little while since we've done anything. Doc and I have taken a long hiatus, but we decided to get back together to do something that's, I think, pretty interesting for the listeners. Over the last several years, there's a lot of discussion, at least what I see and what I hear from other people, about the efficacy of the 1x20 and, all the results that we've seen back, or the feedback we've gotten has been extremely positive. The results, that we've heard have been, well above average. So I think that that's starting to develop, its own credibility in the field, even though it kind of went against conventional wisdom. And,
Let me interrupt you for a minute. It's really not against conventional wisdom. It falls right in with all the laws of motor development, physics, whatever you want.
Right.
It fits right in. So it's not a abnormality. It's just that too many people have been hung up on only one method.
Yeah.
So they haven't opened up their eyes to look at other things that can be as effective, if not more so.
Let me say this, conventional stupidity, because there's been a lot of that where people are just they have no ability to see anything besides what they've already been told or what they've read or whatever the case is. So, but now that this has gained a lot of credibility, amongst the different people. The results that I've seen individually, I have kids that do stuff that you just don't see. One of our younger athletes, who was still a senior in high school, as a junior, performed the 225 29 times, which was higher than any, and he's a linebacker, and it was higher than any linebacker at the NFL Combine last year. So that by 2 reps, which tells us obviously there's a great efficacy if it's a 17-year-old stronger than anybody at the collegiate level in the same lift.
Sure.
So definitely have established, the credibility there, and on a multitude of different fronts. What's really interesting further is all of its other applications. A lot of people haven't really even realized all of them yet and been able to or look to quantify them, but there's a great deal. You see a real decrease in injuries across the board when it's used properly as well. And I want to say this before we go into the interview component. 1x20 is not a system. It is a GPP mechanism. It's not a year-round thing that's used. It's a general preparatory phase. It's very effective. Now, it can be year-round for a very young athlete. It could be year-round. As you go along, obviously that's going to be a shorter period of time, and but it's a fantastic general preparatory phase, and it has a lot of applications and has great value. It's not a system. So, a year-round system, get over that. You got to use your common sense. Obviously, that's not going to be year-round. So I just want to get that out there because there's a ton of misunderstanding on that front. So what's interesting is, Doc, you and I have been together now it's going to be 29 years here pretty quick. And so we want to introduce our guest today, Ron Madison, whom I've known even longer, over 40 years. And Ron's been a power lifter since he was a little kid, and then went on at the higher levels as a teenager and then as an adult to set multiple world records. And, we never really discussed a lot of training until later on when he was probably mid to late 20s. I think we didn't discuss it a ton. What was interesting, I found out by accident, was that some of the methods that he was using were kind of similar to what we were already doing. And I know that you guys spoke about it too. So I don't want to talk too much about that. I want to let Ron do it. Ron, thanks for coming on and talking with us about this. I think first, give everybody just a little bit of a history of your powerlifting background, and then how that evolved into the training methods that you ended up using.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be with both of you after all the years, all the things we've been through, and all have been able to learn from both of you. But yeah, lifting for me started originally as just a way to challenge and test myself physically, because I was actually crippled when I was a child, and I was using both wheelchairs and other devices, including braces and body casts for about 6 years. Went through a number of different experimental procedures, surgeries under a national case study, and unfortunately, none of them were successful. So in the meantime, as I'm somewhat immobile, I had to find ways to do something so that I didn't go crazy. And lifting with my upper body was a way in which that I could stimulate and challenge myself. And so I started lifting and even started competing when I was about 7. And the first few years of competing were while I was still using a chair, and even had to petition the Y, which we both went to as kids, to be able to use their weight room because A, I was too young, and B, I was in a chair, which they didn't allow at the time. So I had to petition the board and gain access to the weight room, and sort of started there, and was fortunate, partly because it was one of my only options. I was extremely motivated, and then grew to be very passionate about it. And I guess can't deny that I probably had some genetic, ability as well. So with results, I was even more and more driven, and performed at the high school nationals throughout, and was fortunate enough to win high school nationals both my junior and senior year, which at that time were very large competitions to the American Drug-Free Powerlifting Association, which is now USA Powerlifting, and was also recognized as best lifter my senior year, and set a handful of national records as well, including total combined lift records, so between the bench, squat, and deadlift. And then was fortunate enough to then go on from there to lift competitively for the U.S. for 15 years. And it's through this that I sort of stumbled onto these methods. Most importantly, the 1x20 is I really was struggling with the fact that when I was following traditional powerlifting protocol, which at that time was 3 weeks of 8s, 3 weeks of 5s, 3 weeks of 3s, a week of double, a week off, and then your competition. I was so often leaving my best lifts in the gym somewhere around the second week of 3s. And then, I'd travel halfway across the world and struggle to do often a single with a weight that I had done an easy triple with in the gym, and was really frustrated, and then had to step back and really evaluate what it was that I was doing. Why was it that I was, overtrained, peaking too soon? And I just, started logging everything religiously, and decided, hey, let's just, for the heck of it, let's shorten that duration up. So let's go from a 12-week peaking plan to maybe down to like a 6-week. And it was a little more successful. And then I thought, well, how about I find a way to reduce the intensity, and I start with a higher rep range. So I was starting at 20 plus reps, and I was, adding a significant amount of weight every week. And I was, calculating about what it was that I needed to do in order to reach, peaking on time. And I was over a 6-week period at times going from 20 reps to a 1 rep max. And I found that I wasn't, peaking too soon. I wasn't overtrained. I was showing up for the competitions, fresh and feeling so much better. And then I just, began to apply that more throughout the year, and found that I was just even that much more successful. So it was really by accident.
And accidentally, you accidentally broke multiple world records, and 2 of which that still stand.
Correct.
And unequipped, which for anybody who doesn't know, is not wearing a lifting shirt, drug tested as well, with a bench of almost 490 at a body weight of 198, I believe, right?
Yes.
About where that was at, yeah. And you have one as a younger lifter at body weight of 170 with a 418 lift.
Yeah, my first world record I set in Poland when I was I just turned 19, and I traveled to Sonic, Poland, where I was expecting to lift as a teenager, only to find out they didn't have a teenage category. So they threw me into the junior men's, which was 20 to 24. And it got even more interesting from there, because I happened to be there to compete against a hometown favorite. So things got real crazy. But anyhow, I was fortunate enough to pull off a 418 raw at a body weight of 170. And it was right after that Doc and I met for the first time. and talked about how this happened naturally with, no enhancing, supplementation really at all, no coaching at all to that point. And, how I'd stumbled upon what it was that, he knew so much about and what he was teaching.
And if I remember right, you never even took creatine. You couldn't. You didn't tolerate it very well, if I remember right.
No, I didn't agree with my stomach. I mean, back at that time, I think most of what was available was flavored, and my stomach just wouldn't do it. And so, yeah, it wasn't even until after I met Doc and worked through with both of you that I, was introduced to Naturaflex and then Natura Health products and Standard Process and some of the stuff that you both have worked
more
with
natural
for years.
stuff.
But really, it was just good nutrition and rest and constantly logging, training and I was super fortunate then to be able to learn so much more and continue on from there. And then, with that set a deadlift world record, as we talked about too, that was just under 700 pounds at 198 raw. And that's been shattered by Benny Verbeek from Belgium now, but
it's
that's
still
for a little while.
It's still amazing. And one other little quick anecdote too. I know that you did you don't do them in competition, but you did the 225 test in training. How many reps did you get?
So coincidentally, the best I ever did was when I walked into Reese Buffer High School one time, as I was helping out with off-season stuff at that time, which you coincidentally do now.
Yeah.
And just checking in on a class. I had a suit and tie on. I was a financial advisor at the time, and the kids were talking trash. So I loosened my tie and laid down, and I bet one of the kids that I could do more reps with 225 than he could do with 95. And, they, of course, thought that was ridiculous. And I ended up doing 52 reps in front of that gym class that day. And then later, went to one of the pre-combine, events with you. And I think I did 48 there, which was frustrating because I actually trained for it, but I had a cold the week before, and that's just how it goes. But my strength endurance was always actually better than my 1 rep strength. I mean, the 1x20 definitely improved my 1 rep strength significantly, but my strength endurance was always the best. Like as a runner in track, 440 was my run. I could maintain that speed throughout. I ran anchor in the 440, but I think I repped 275 31 times. That was my best rep range with that. And at near 50, I'm still doing some decent repetitions. I can still hit 405 for 20 on the deadlift, and still doing okay on the other lifts as well. But it's still a big part of my training now.
Right, and I think that's the other significant thing for people to understand. At a body weight of less than 200 pounds, 225, 52 reps is still higher than anyone's ever gotten at the NFL Combine. I think the highest is 50 or 51. This by a guy that was 300 pounds. So that body weight, and to beat all of them is because you're about a cornerback's weight doing that. So yeah, that's just off the charts. So Doc, he kind of came upon this because I guess really, in my opinion, just being practical, like things weren't working. You got to try something different. This is how I found you. Tried different things, and they weren't as impressive as, that you might think, and looking for some new ideas. So Doc, now listen, people say, okay, yeah, you can do that. You can get better with strength endurance. Yeah, you can get a little stronger. But for powerlifting, you have to lift maximal weights all the time or nearly all the time. Tell us why what Ron did worked and what's the science behind all that.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that most people have the idea that, well, if I'm going to lift maximum weight, I have to train with maximum weights. Well, that's a misnomer. What every athlete should think of is that if I want to be the best in a lift, to lift the most weight, I have to work up to it. And to work up to it, I have to use fewer repetitions, or rather more repetitions. So the training should consist of the higher reps that build up or develop your body to the extent that you can do a 1 maximum lift. But don't lift maximally in your training to do a maximal lift in competition. The training should be different from the actual lift. And it's hard to get this point across. You have to train for what you want to accomplish. You don't train with your accomplishment. Am I making sense?
Yeah. It's like if you're training for speed, you're not necessarily running the 40 all year round.
Right.
Same analogous, I would say, right?
Yeah, same thing.
It's
Yeah,
actually small. It's actually a smaller part of the year that you actually run the distance that you're going to run.
Correct.
So same.
I think there are so many layers to why it helped me. And of course, Doc, both you and Joseph know a lot more about this than I do. But what I found was that through doing these repetitions, I was really learning the lift. So I had so much time under the bar.
Yeah, right.
And I was pre-fatigued, as I'm reaching 16, 17 reps. And I really have to learn proper mechanics. I really had to learn proper leverage. I had to learn to fire things in the right order, from the feet through the glutes on up through the arms to the extension, or I'd fail. And it gave me time to learn that. And with my lack of education, I tell people it became ingrained. I learned it. And for me, that was really, really helpful. And I tell people so often, that are reluctant to try this. I mean, I've had so many people over the years that have either trained with me or I've trained. And so often they're so reluctant to do, 20 reps. It's an ego thing. It's a lot of work. But anybody that I've ever talked into trying it has been extremely successful. I have one gentleman in particular, you happen to know him as well. His name's Jeff Zietlow. He was our high school quarterback. And,
right.
That was another thing that lifting graced me with, was the opportunity to play on a state championship team and, play nose guard on a Class A state championship team. I was so small, they would laugh at me the first play every game until they found out how strong I was and how quick I was. And a lot of it was attributed to my training. But Jeff, his worst lift by far was his bench. And he'd do 185 for maybe 5 reps on a good day. He trained with me for like 7 years and put on a lot of size and a lot of strength in other areas, but his bench was just terrible. And I finally talked him into doing it one time. So after following the 1x20, for about, I think we stuck with it for about 10 weeks. And then we retested. I'm not exaggerating. He went from doing 185 for 5 reps to doing it for 15 reps. It was that significant. And this is a guy that's a trained athlete, that was a very good athlete and a very smart individual. And so it's amazing the benefit that people see when they actually apply it. And for me, I feel like not only did it help me really learn the lift, learn the sequencing, learn the leverage, but I was also, so much fresher. Like you say, there are a lot of reasons why you don't want to train heavy all the time. You just can't do it if you're drug-free, for one. And beyond the recovery aspect, your joints can't handle it.
That's right.
And I tell people all the time, when I'm working with people who are athletes, I'll take a gifted athlete and gladly undertrain them every day of the week and have them show up fresh and ready to perform over somebody that's overtrained any day, because you take these guys that are already somewhat gifted and you see these, strength coaches and others, pushing them even during the season. And it's amazing, they think somehow they show up pre-fatigued and tight and don't understand why, they're not performing on the field. They're cramping, they're, whatever it might be, but they've taken away so much of their ability to perform on the day. It's just so frustrating. But the 1x20 for me has been incredibly successful, not only when it comes to my strength training, but in helping others, who are just generally overtrained in general.
Yeah, let me bring in a comment here that you kind of mentioned it, Ron, but one thing that every athlete should keep in mind, that you don't train during the season. That sounds, almost I don't know what you want to call it, but
Heresy.
you never hear this. Yeah, heresy. But training during the season interferes with your playing ability. You train to become a better athlete, to play better, to do something better. You have a purpose for it. You don't just train for the sake of training. And if you keep this in mind, all your training should be to, let's say, be a better athlete. So when the season comes, be a better athlete. You need time, like in your lifting, you started off only lifting X amount and you went to Y, Z, and so on. You increased, you perform better. So the same thing on the field. Once you start playing, improve your playing performance. What do you want to improve your lifting ability when the goal now is to be a better athlete? So there's a portion of the season you do your lifting. Then a portion of the season where you're playing or you're competing. Then there's a portion where you're recovering. So we have to differentiate the different types of training during the year.
Sure.
And stick with them.
Yeah, the
And not
unfortunate
do the
thing
same
is
thing year round.
so many people think that lifting heavy correlates to a good athlete. And
No.
then the unfortunate thing is they get so emotionally attached to that they feel like if they don't train during the season, they're losing that because they can't hit those numbers anymore. They really don't understand that there is no direct correlation between lifting heavy weights and being a good athlete. And that's hard for me as a power lifter to admit. But fortunately, I learned that, when I was quite young. But I found that I could at least do a so I coached high school football for 4 years. And, I found that with a 1x20, as Yosef mentioned earlier, I reduced the number of injuries to nothing, on average. And B, I could continue to do 1 day of 1x20 on a Monday, even during the season, as long as the kids weren't going to absolute failure for a maintenance program. Yeah. And they could do just enough to emotionally feel, still feel okay about themselves. And then I would maybe do one more day a week in which I would do, I would follow some of Cal Dietz's stuff where we'd do maybe 3 sets of 3 with 70%. So bar speed had to be, fast. I think Cal says, does he say 0.8 meters per second or something of that
That's
nature?
where you're normally developing power is at about 0.8 meters per second. Yeah.
Okay. So at least that fast and or maybe 2 sets of 5, but just active recovery type stuff, just to make them feel like they're doing what they need to do. But I found that the 1x20 was even beneficial for active recovery during the season, as long as, they didn't get carried away.
It's good for maintenance too. So let's be clear on that too. What Doc means is you're not training for performance during the season. You're trained to maintain. So yeah, you will do something, right. And it's not every day, but it's maintenance. You're looking at, hey, we just want to maintain what we've got. We'll take a day out of the week. And sometimes what we might do is use some specialized exercises that don't take any energy, maybe on 1 or 2 other days for 20 minutes, something small. But we're not training to perform anymore. We're training to maintain what we develop. Hopefully we developed a lot in the off season. So that's what's important. And 2 quick anecdotes here as well. Ron, you mentioned the Reese Puffer High School where I've been consulting and where you went to school and played there. One of the coaches there decided to jump on and just do it himself because it was weird, and strange to him. He was using other methods, more of the conventional stuff that you'll see online. And he said, all right, I'm going to try it. And let's just see. And then that way, proof's in the pudding, right? So he sent me a text, and I'll read it to you. He said he finished a cycle of 1x20, which was a couple months long, I think 2 to 3 months. He increased his bench by 70 pounds during that time frame, and he gained 12 pounds. It was in 10 weeks. I'm sorry, not 12. 10 weeks, gained 70 pounds on the bench and gained 12 pounds of body weight, which I'm presuming was mostly lean tissue. I don't think he gained much body fat at all. And then also my middle son at the school where he's at, where they lift heavy, a lot of this, typical stuff. He broke their squat record as a basketball player for his weight class. So basketball players aren't typically supposed to be the ones setting the school record in powerlifting, right? So it just goes to show you, just on the, little anecdotal level, all the different ways that we see this come across, come out in results that are seen by people that really are incomparable to everybody else. I mean, I know that when you set the one world record, there was nobody within 40 or 50 pounds, if I remember right, at the time. I mean,
no, not the first record. The second record actually was set by somebody that we all knew well was on drugs, and
okay,
I could have petitioned it, but I just left it as a goal. So it was still a little bit of a margin, but yeah, the first record, fortunately, there was a pretty significant gap there between the prior record and what I set. But yeah, it's frustrating for me how, despite the fact that it's been so successful for me, and it's so very proven, not just in example, but when it comes to the science, that it's hard to get people to try it, because they really have to put their ego in check, which is hard for a lot of people to do, especially people that love to lift.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Nobody wants to do 20 repetitions initially because they can't use a lot of weight. And if their strength endurance isn't very good, they fall flat on their face initially. But
That's right.
But there's so much room for improvement because of that. And that's, what any meathead power lifter will acknowledge, because most of them have listened to Louis and other guys over the years, is you're supposed to do what you're bad at, but yet it's hard to get people to try this. And I didn't even know if what I was doing with on-season maintenance was actually correct. So I guess when I was explaining that, I probably should have said, Doc, was I doing, entirely the wrong thing? But I was just trying to keep these kids moving and doing something, so emotionally they weren't feeling like they were losing everything they've gained, and because it's so ingrained that they have to train on season as well because it's so common. And I just thought, well, the 1x20 at least is going to be the least harmful thing they can do.
No, it was actually smart. It was smart. It was a smart tactic for sure. That was exactly what you should be doing at that point in time. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was a guess. It might have become more intuitive for you after having been around Doc for a long time, knowing him. You kind of I notice sometimes I do think I've done things that I didn't have a 100% validation for, but it was kind of intuitive. And I went back and found out later that was the correct. I'd go check with Doc later. Hey, did I do that right? And it's like, yeah, that's right. And it's just kind of, because your mindset starts to think, because I think what happens, Doc, and I want you to kind of give a little bit of history on this if you would, because what I've noticed anyway is that with a lot of this stuff in our field, which is so different than any other scientific field, because if you were, let's say, a brain surgeon, nobody would ever comment on how you should operate on someone's brain, right? You're a brain surgeon, you're an expert. They would be deferential to you. If you were, any kind of scientist, an astrophysicist, and you're talking about, how do you find out how far a star away is from us? Nobody would debate with you on the mathematics of it or whatever. They'd just be deferential. But because we're in this field, every meathead in the country thinks that he can comment on science that is way, way, way over his head. I mean, he doesn't have one clue about it, but not only does he feel free to comment on it, he's convinced that he knows, with no proof, no evidence, no data, but he's convinced that he knows what he's doing. And it's become a dogma. Like you see this too, Ron. I know, like you see, when you're talking to guys at the gym, it's dogma. People get emotional and upset over this, like it's a religion or something. It's like,
I don't know what university started offering it, but somebody offered a PhD in bro science about 20 years ago.
And there's a bunch of guys that got them.
Yeah.
They've been pumping out degrees left and right like it's a machine. And so I see this all the time. And Doc, I want you to comment on the history of this, because I see this all the time. People will come to me, and I don't like to be honest with you, I don't really like to discuss it too much, because number one, I don't care what other people think. I'm not trying to sell anything to them. I sell books, and you can decide on your own if you like them or not. Those authors' credentials are you can't debate them. But people will come to me and say, well, what do you think about this or that? We've been doing this and we really like it. And here's how this whole discussion gets disarmed. I learned this a long time ago. I just ask them why. And they don't know why. Well, we've been doing it for a while. I had a coach call me about a month or two ago. Very nice guy. He was really, truly inquisitive. he said, well, this is what we've been doing. We were using power cleans and stuff. He goes, but we've been seeing a lot of shoulder injuries. And I said, well, I think I know why. And I said, and I asked him, well, why do you do what you're doing? And he said, well, kind of picked it up from here and there. And I said, but why? What was the underlying science? Is there any? And he thought about it and he goes, no, there really isn't any. I don't know why. We did it because that's what other people were doing. So, Doc, you say that what you're doing really isn't unconventional, or what you came up with. And I know this was part of your doctoral thesis, too, some of the basis of this. How did this happen? How did we get to where we're at? Why did it go the direction that it went, as opposed to what you say, the 1x20 is truly more conventional? What happened?
Well, I think it was already kind of established in most coaches and athletes' eyes that if you want to become better, you have to lift more. You got to become stronger. Well, we overlook the fact that the best athlete in the world is not the strongest.
Never the strongest.
Yeah, and we take a look at this simple little fact that the best athlete is not the strongest completely evades most people. And you say, why? Well, that's a good question. And I don't think there is an answer. I think they just got it in their mind that, hey, if you want to become stronger, you have to lift weights. Well, that's true. But there's a limit. And we don't look at limits. So you can go beyond the limit. And instead of becoming better, you become worse. And this is also proven that if you want to be the best athlete, you don't want to lift the heaviest. If you do, you're not going to be the best athlete. It's very simple. But, once an idea comes across, and if you have people who are, for lack of a better term, uneducated, and maybe there's a better term than uneducated, but who get stuck in the mud, so to speak, on one way of doing things, and that becomes the gospel. Yeah. Hey, if you want to become better, you got to lift heavy. And they carry the heavy to extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, we need heavy for X amount of time, or we need this for X amount of time.
Right.
See, we don't look at the limits to everything. And everything has limits. There's limits on knowledge. There's a limit to
everything has a trade-off to it, right?
That's right.
You have to decide at what point this is no longer the most valuable course of action for athletes and a power lifter. Like for a guy who's just lifting to be stronger, he doesn't even care about being an athlete. There are other methods. Now, I'm not saying that you can't get stronger lifting heavy all year round. You can. You're going to get injured for sure. That's going to be and I think all powerlifters at the high level kind of accept that fact, right? We're going to get injured, and they're going to hurt a lot, achy joints and things of this nature. And I understand. So they kind of accept that fact, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary though.
Let me interrupt. You made me lose my thought. See, the key is, or what they overlook. They take the one aspect and carry it to an extreme. They don't look at all the facts, or don't look at, hey, if a little bit is good, we should just keep it at a little bit.
Right.
Don't think that more is going to make us that much better.
Well, that's the American way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. If a little bit is good, a lot's got to be a lot better. Or more is going to be a lot better.
Well, right. And having grown up in this country, I can say that I experienced firsthand the difficulty in getting my hands, as hungry as I was and as motivated as I was, I had a really hard time finding sources of legitimate science and information. So, what was I exposed to? The magazine periodicals mostly, but beyond that, I had almost no access, because I was pre-internet at the time, and I had no access. Honestly, the first scientific journals that I was ever exposed to were yours, docs, and I remember, I found one, and then I started ordering more, and then I was getting some through Yosef, and I carried those things around with me everywhere I went because it was the only real science that I had ever been exposed to. And number one, I knew that it was way better than anything else that I had found previously. But I was also pretty excited that it kind of agreed with what I was had started to do. But yeah, I think unfortunately in this country, that's how it started, and then it's hard. We resist change. So for so long, people thought that the ultimate source of knowledge and information were these people that they found in these periodicals. And most of them at that time were bodybuilders. Some of them happened to be, somewhat strong. And so, that was, who we all worshiped and followed. And then, USA, or, the different powerlifting magazines came out. And then so we at least were exposed to some of the strength athletes, but they were all on drugs. And so no matter what we tried, we overtrained and failed and just thought, well, maybe it's because we weren't capable, we weren't the genetic freaks that they were. But the reality of it was none of it was geared toward a drug-free athlete, so I think that's where it started for me and for a lot of others, and then so much of what you bought into, became ingrained, and we're creatures of habit. We all resist change.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway for people is that I had this conversation with Dr. Bondarchuk a while back, and he said, look, he said a good coach, he's 82 now, and he says a good coach is always questioning what he does. He said you're always looking at it and being kind of critiquing your own work and constantly looking at how you can adjust this. There is no one method per se. There's so many. It's a confluence of so many things that you have to take into consideration, and yeah, there is no one single method. But we know one thing that we found, and Doc, you know this as well. Even some of the research that the Russians had done back in the 70s with Dr. Garkovy, they had shown that even with elite athletes, that the training levels with elite athletes should be only medium level. They shouldn't be high intensity, just for very brief periods of time. Maybe some higher intensity work, but the bulk of their year should be medium intensity work. And they found that the organism, the body, adapted much better, more deeply, and fully. And this kind of where you come from too, Doc. And I want to preface this because I want you to talk about it a little bit. What was interesting, I think, with your work that was even what took the work of the Russians, you took it another step, is that you were always looking at what is the lowest amount of stimulus we can use, the economy, training economy, to really get the most bang for the buck, to really get the highest response. And what we found was that it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't it's just real precise stimulus, but it doesn't take a high quantity of volume or intensity. What was your thoughts on that, Doc, as you started developing the system that you did?
I think the key was that we need a little bit of everything. See, and this is a progression that we know of in motor learning and other aspects. You see, the knowledge was already there. Nobody bothered to put it all together or put it into a training program. Mm-hmm. The science behind it was well known. Or I shouldn't say well known. I knew it, but
people who were looking could find it. It was well known amongst people who were looking.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you looked, you could find it and make a difference. But when you take a look at the science, and this is what I did, I looked at science of motor learning and so on. And I said, well, it's like everything else. When let's say you're learning a sport, you don't start off at the highest level. Hey, here's a ball. Let me see you throw it to maximum distance. No, here's a ball. Here's how you throw it. Here's your body movements. You got to learn the body movements. You got to learn which actions occur, what kind of sequence, and then you get into the actual throw. So there's a learning progression. And the same thing with lifting. There's a learning progression. We start off, as is well known in all fields, you start off slowly. You start off with the lowest amount of weight, or the least resistance. Can you imagine teaching somebody how to throw, and you're going to use a shot put? There's no way in the world you're going to learn how to throw. And
Right.
even once you did, you wouldn't be able to throw the shot put. You'd be
Right.
able to, that's why the name put. It's a shot put. You push it. You don't throw it. It's too heavy. So there's an optimal amount. And once we learn this, develop the base, develop the ability to do what you want to do. See, this is what really hit me. But in order to do something, we have to develop the body so that it's capable of doing this, not just training to do it. And making the body capable is a feat in itself. This is what training should consist of. So once I got this through my head, I said, hey, we don't need this heavy weight. We have to use more light weights in order to achieve our goals. And as we progress through the light weights, we go into the heavier weights. It's a natural progression. But we can't start off with the heaviest.
Right, and this kind of goes back to what Ron was talking about. With he was learning, his motor learning was developing with those lighter weights and heavier, or I'm sorry, higher reps and lighter weights.
Yeah. So where this concept came from with most athletes, hey, I got to lift heavy. I don't know where it came from, but boy, it sure permeates the field.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it does. I think what it is that the machismo factor. In the American way, I think most of the training in the United States is not, obviously it's not scientific. I think it's cultural, and it just reflects our culture in general of more of everything. We work more than anybody else in the world does, like at our jobs. We do everything more. Everything is more in the United States. We take everything to the extreme.
It's more of a social ranking thing.
It is, yeah.
We go to the gym because we're worried about our rank, our position, that hierarchy that exists inside the gym. And then, if we climb high enough there, we feel like it elevates us outside of the gym,
Yeah.
So, the thing for me that I wish I could have learned prior to meeting Doc and working with both of you is, and I never even stumbled upon it by accident. It just wasn't there, was the role and the sensitivity, even more importantly, of the nervous system. And what frustrates me to this day is the lack of information and the lack of understanding, even when it comes to higher level competitive athletes, in that the function, the role of it, and just how sensitive it is, and how specific your training has to be, as you mentioned, Doc, to stimulate, to prepare, without overdoing it, without essentially doing harm, to that system and others, in the process. And I think that's purely for me how I stumbled upon the benefit of the 1x20 is I just simply wasn't overtraining, and it was the hardest thing for me to resist because I was so passionate about my training, and I love being in the gym still so much to this day, and it's still hard for me to resist overtraining. But the benefits of, stimulation and preparation without this, need for, as we've always heard, seen, no pain, no gain. And you think that you need to be sore, to have accomplished something, when in reality, it's the opposite, that's damage. And I have the hardest time still teaching people and getting people to believe and understand that, when you've trained to deep soreness, your body's really just trying to get back to homeostasis.
Right.
You're not going to benefit from that workout. You're never going to get better. You're just going to get back to where you were before the workout, if you're lucky enough. Most people train too soon. They haven't even gotten back to homeostasis,
right,
let alone given themselves a chance to improve. And so, I guess that for me, I was so fortunate when I finally started to discover why it was that I was so much stronger than so many people that were twice my size, because obviously strength isn't directly proportionate to size, and the role of the nervous system. And then, how to learn to monitor it, listen to it, and use it without overusing it. And And I guess that's the biggest thing that I struggle with today. And I think that's part of the reason, all of those things put together, the adages, the theories, the overwhelming desire to constantly do more for various reasons, either because you love it or because you're trying to reach that status, out train everybody else, be in the gym for hours at a time, whatever it might be. I think it's just so hard to break through all that and get people to understand that 99.9% of the time, less is more.
And there are a lot of principles here that you touched on, and I want to make a couple of points about that before we wrap up. If you're sore, that's your body talking to you. It's the same way, like if you drink too much one night and you wake up the next morning and you puke, your body's talking to you. Hey, stupid, this isn't working for us. The soreness develops, so you'll quit, so you'll lay off. So training, number one, if you're sore on a regular basis, you're doing something wrong, number one. Number two, if you train while you're sore, you're even dumber. It's like putting a coat of paint on wet paint.
Right.
Like wait, before you let you let the paint dry before you try to put the second coat on. Why in the world would you put another coat of paint on a wall that's still wet? That's it's exactly analogous. It'll just create a freaking mess. Makes no sense at all. So the idea of all of this is to get the body to do what you want it to do. You're trying to trick it. You're playing chess with the body. You have to outsmart it. It has principles, and if you work within those principles, then you can get some success. And it's not easy all the time. It can get complicated, especially as you go along further. It's not simple, but you have to be thinking with your head, not with any emotion. This is about being smart. So if you hear some coach say, well, we're going to be the hardest working team, he doesn't know what he's doing. Because if you're okay with being the hardest working, you're the dumbest.
Right.
Really, in my opinion, that's stupid. I don't care if you're the hardest working team. We want to win. And so if that's the case, then, we got to use our head and be smart about this. Doc, give us some parting thoughts on this. This is your baby. Really, because even in the conventional areas of science, other people still kind of poo-poo it a little bit, but there's no questioning this. I don't need anybody to do a study on this because I've seen it too many times over and over and over again to know that this works. And by the way, I want to give one little quick endorsement. I once again, talking to Dr. Bondarchuk, he said, he goes, when you do 20 reps, he said, them last 4 reps are maximal reps.
That's right.
He said 17, 18, 19, and 20. He said they're 90% reps, whether or not you realize that. He said they're having the same effect on the body in terms of developing strength as if you were using 90%.
All right. See, that's the main point that most people ignore. See, in a 1x20, you have divisions. Let's say the first 10 reps, they're for endurance. When you're doing 20.
Yeah.
Then if you're doing, let's say, from 10 to 15, well, they become a little bit more intense, but you still got the endurance. Then when you get to the last one, let's say the last 5, well, now you're really getting more and more intensity, which you don't have when you're doing 1 to 5. So it combines them all. It prepares you for that maximum intensity. Why do you want to start with, let's say, maximum intensity and keep it there? That's where your burnout occurs. You got to start off, develop that muscular endurance. See, muscular endurance is so important. The ability to continue doing whatever it is you're doing. And Ron, you brought this out beautifully with some of the examples you gave. How the reps become ultra important. And then the reps, as you do the reps, you're going to be able to do maximums. The reps are going to lead to more and more intensity. Even if you just try doing more and more reps all the time, you're going to get stronger because you're increasing the intensity as you do it over and over and over. Just a simple idea that you're going to use more weight, that's more intensity. So if I can leave any point or advice to a budding athlete, don't get carried away with strength. Strength is critical. We need it. But you can still perform without it. I thought of myself, I'm going to date myself here. When I started, no, I was going to say lifting weights. No, I couldn't lift weights. The advice that I got, or I shouldn't say advice, admonition, coach would look at me and say, if I see you in a gym lifting weights, you're off the team. See, weights at that time were a no-no. And we still had good athletes. So we didn't need the weights. But as the weights came into play, we found that if used judicially, do it smart, the weights can make you even better. See, that's the role of weightlifting. It can make you better, but it's not a goal in itself. It's not an end in itself.
Right.
See, and I think of this all the time, you know, with that coach telling me, if I catch you lifting weights, you're going to be off the team. You know, today, you would never hear that.
Oh, no. No, they say you need to be in there all the time.
Yeah.
And early in the morning on not a full night of sleep, too. They'd like you in there at 6 a.m., knowing you didn't go to bed at 10 p.m., and they'd like you in there anyway. They prefer that you work out over getting more sleep.
Yeah.
Even if you're sick.
Even if you're sick, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the problem is that the body doesn't work this way.
No.
And what I tell everybody is this. The weight dosage matters on everything. If you were to go to the doctor and you had an infection and he were to prescribe an antibiotic, and let's say the normal dose is 50 milligrams, he's not going to give you 500 milligrams today to get rid of the infection faster. It doesn't work that way. The body adapts to things, and that stimulus, the body adapts more deeply to lighter stimuluses over and over again, as opposed to one big stimulus one time. Like, you know, like if you have somebody who is in an emergency situation, they can pick up a car one time, they can't ever do it again. And they're exhausted after that for days, you know, all those things. It's constant stimulation, progressive, constant, light stimulation that really works. And the frequency, the amount of rest in between should be optimal. You know, you're paying attention to sleep and nutrition as well, obviously. But it's a consistent action that's more important than all the craziness. So
I think people have tried to simplify things too much, and it goes along with some of those old adages. People are still talking about breaking through plateaus. There's no such thing as a plateau. Plateau doesn't exist. It's your body telling you better stop. But if you listen to people, you need to work harder. You know, and the unfortunate truth is if you take that simplistic approach, it makes it really hard to make use of the science. It makes it really hard to do the right thing. If you and then you take, you know, the addiction that comes along with it, which I understand, but you know, like you talked about, follow the principles. But unfortunately, the principles aren't always, there's not always immediate glory in the principles, because you got to put your ego in check to do the right thing. And that's what people have the hardest time with in this day and age, is they don't like the practice part. You know, they want to show off. They, you know, and even in practice, they want to be practicing harder than everybody else. They want to be practicing heavier than everybody else. And that's the hardest thing, you know, for people to grasp is the disadvantage that they put themselves in when they follow that, you know, approach, and they can't check their ego, and they don't learn that, you know, you're going to get a lot stronger if you train a lot lighter throughout the year, which is hard to accept, and if you don't overtrain. And less is more is for some reason the hardest thing for people to accept when it comes to strength training and athletic training.
It's antithetical to everything that they believe and stand for. There's no question about that. Well, Doc, number one, I want to thank you for coming on and doing this with us, and for the contributions. You don't get nearly the credit you should for all of these different contributions that you brought to the fore. I'm, you know, obviously I'm your cheerleader, but you don't get nearly enough credit for these, because a lot of people don't realize this wasn't a Russian idea. This was your idea to put this together. There was a lot of advancements that you made over what the Russians were doing that are profoundly an improvement over what was being done, especially with the developing athlete, you know, on up to the elite level. You've done a ton of different things that have improved that dramatically. So definitely want to give you the credit for that. I appreciate it.
And I think one thing that's overlooked, and I don't mean to prolong our time here, but the Russians were neophytes when it came to weightlifting also. They didn't practice weightlifting. Their gyms, let's say Universal Gym, first ones appeared, I don't know, back in the 70s or 80s. See, they did not originate it. They came up with it the same as we did.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't that far removed. So what I was doing had nothing to do with what the Russians were doing. They were doing their thing and I was doing my thing.
Yeah.
See?
I think you had used them as a platform, like, you know, them as a baseline, and then you went beyond what they were doing. No question about it. And because the results that we're seeing and that we have seen, I've never seen anyone else get. I know there's not too many people I don't know in the field now, in the scientific area or whatnot, and I haven't seen anything close to the results that we have gotten using the system that you developed. So thanks, Doc. I appreciate you as always. Ron, thank you for coming on. This was really cool. It's really cool to see this application into the powerlifting area, because this, like, I could see people would say, okay, yeah, it works with athletes, but with, like in sports, but powerlifting, no way, it's impossible. And here this flies in the face of that convention. So thanks a lot for sharing your story with us, Ron. It's pretty cool to see its application in an area where no one would guess.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's exciting to see people start to accept it in the strength world, because there's a lot of room for improvement. But even more so, thank both of you for all that you've done for me over the years. And one last example, I get a kick out of people that are fairly achieved in the world of whether it be strength or sports, appreciating what I've been able to accomplish. That's like, I tell people the biggest compliment is having somebody else that's very achieved tell you you've achieved something, or you're a freak, or whatever it might be. But I get the biggest kick out of people who appreciate what I've been able to do, but the ones that really understand, they get even a bigger kick out of the fact that I was able to work with you, Doc, and talk to you and learn so much from you. Because the ones that really get it, they're the ones that just can't believe that I've been able to take up so much of your time and learn so much from you, and always have a ton of questions. And the wealth of knowledge that you've been over the years has been humbling, and has had a huge impact on not just my performance, but my quality of life. And the fact that my passion has only continued to grow for my sport because of the understanding that I have for it, thanks to you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and let me just, I hear this all the time from Yosef mainly, how many people are reluctant or can't think, or think that I'm too busy to talk to them. No, I'm not. Hey, I'm retired now, and I'm open to talking to a lot of people to help them. This has been my goal all my life, to help athletes and coaches. So if you have any questions or anything that's bothering you, feel free to give me a call. Be happy to talk to you. This is what it's all about, being able to share information and to help everyone grow to their maximum.
And for those who don't know, you can get the 1x20 book at dryessis.com, amongst some of his other books that he's got that are fantastic. Every one of his books, I hear over and over from people, boy, I can understand his books, and then I can go out and use the material, where they can't say that with even like the books that we publish. They're more theoretical, but Doc's books are great for any athlete. He has an ability to make the complicated sound simple. He can explain it to a 6-year-old, and that's a sign of mastery. And I always say that, Doc, your work is marked by the term elegant simplicity. I know what goes into it. I understand that part, but you're able to put it in a way that other people can understand it and use it, and that's a real sign of mastery. I think more than anything else of the concept. So, go on Doc's site, check that out. 1x20, the book. You can get there, and also you can email Doc and get a hold of him if you got questions. So, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate your time today, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.